Now this is a very strange one. Um, this is a claim that 50,000 Chinese soldiers were killed by US bomb in the United States, in Maine, and that somehow this was concealed and it's all been hidden. And so there's basically the Chinese tried to invade the United States via Maine for some reason, and then 50,000 of them all killed in a bomb, and nobody noticed. So I mean, Maine, the people around by 1,000 with their mobile phones and streaming up the internet, and there's just no way that they could have missed 50,000 Chinese soldiers and none of them being photographed. And anyway, it's just one of these things that got viral for some reason. It's sometimes hard to know why these things catch on people's minds and they start sharing them and panicking. But when your mind is panicking, you don't think clearly. And actually, it's probably based on a story about how Canada has been training some people from the Chinese army, PLA, to win in cold weather, how to survive in cold conditions in Canada. And that might seem very strange. Aren't Canada and China supposed to be enemies or something? Well, not really, no. Nobody's at war with China, and that's pretty obvious. Nobody's declared war with China. And there's a lot of people saying concerned about human rights and saying strong things about them, but that's not the same as being at war with them. And Canada, of course, don't want to invade the United States, but they have historical, but nor does China. And Canada have historical ties with China, which might be surprise you a little bit, but it goes way, way back. Goes back centuries. They had historical ties. They had many Chinese labourers early on, and so they have about 5% of the population is Chinese, and they were one of the first Western countries to recognise the communist government of China. And then many have emigrated to Canada from Hong Kong and from Taiwan, which is the exiled government of China, where the exiled government of China went to. So with that background, it's not so surprising. And again, many people don't realise, but the United States Army, until in 2016, and it only stopped in 2018, when China started to militarise the South China Sea islands. Then they did a huge joint military exercise, not just with the United States and China, but with a whole range of countries around the Pacific Rim, all joined together in this huge exercise. So here you can see a Chinese boat and a United States one and another one, all in a convoy together as part of this military exercise. So yes, even with all the rules about not employing Chinese, not getting, like for instance, Chinese astronauts are not permitted to go to the International Space Station because of a law that's been passed in the United States, meaning the United States is not permitted to cooperate with China in space. It's a bit quite anachronistic, because China is not going to learn too much from the ISS. It's already got its own space station, so you don't need to have secrets from them. And but anyway, oh yes, there's someone here commenting who said where the original source was from. And this is another thing that people have kind of put into this story. So they claim that sadly, there was an F-16 fighter jet, the second one of this year, crashed into National Forest in Michigan. This is the chap who died. And so again, there's a claim that this was shot down by a Chinese super weapon, but it wasn't, it was just a crash. And it's still investigating to find out what happened. And so the vibration in Maine, it was nothing to do with 50,000 Chinese troops. So the Chinese don't want to invade. The Chinese, I've got another separate video article about this, but the Chinese China is as large as it has ever been, pretty much in its entire history. They've reconquered just about all the land they formerly had. And at any stage in its history, not many places left that have been under Chinese rule in the past that aren't under Chinese rule now. And they just don't have ambition to conquer more countries. That's not where they're at. They're involved. They've got the economic influence in the world, political influence. They do want to assert. They have differences in view with other countries over the rights in the South China Sea, and they are asserting their ownership of large areas of the sea that other countries don't don't belong to them. So that's the main remaining conflict, and of course the boundary with the Himalayas and with India. There's and regions of conflict, and with Bhutan, there's some regions there where they're saying we think the boundary should be in a different place, and things like that. But it's all very minor compared. There's no way they want to invade another country, and they have enough trouble with the countries with the provinces that are already in China. China has the same population as India, 3 or 4 times the population of Europe. It's very huge, and 3 or 4 times the population of the United States. Very populous and very large, and they don't want to invade anyone else. Just not where they're at. And there's no way that they want to fight the United States directly in a war, because nobody's going to win a war like that. And so if ever something like that was to start to arise, they'd immediately be wanting to de-escalate. And if I can talk about that separately, in our modern world, then the situation is we're so much more tied together and intricately connected together. We're also working together over the entire world in ways that just didn't happen in the early 20th century. It's such a different situation, and we have so many laws governing human rights, and that just didn't exist at the time of World War II. We're just not in the same world, and it's very hard now to imagine something like that happening, on such a scale. And what wars we do have, they tend to involve much smaller numbers of smaller forces and much fewer fatalities than they used to. Although we have had some horrific wars like the Iraq War was really rather appalling. But the likes of World War II, even Vietnam, things happened in Vietnam that would not be permitted today. The generals just would refuse. If the president or something was to say, you've got to do this, because it's no longer acceptable in modern warfare. So some of those things, unacceptable loss of life to civilians, which is just not done anymore. We've moved forward. So we've moved forward quite a bit, even since the Vietnam War. And things like personnel, mines and so on. So gradually we're moving in that direction. If you look at it from year to year, decade to decade, you see the exceptions, like people who are not doing things right. It's not so obvious. But if you look at, like, say, several decades back, 50 years back, or 100 years back, you can see a big progress towards much more respect of human rights, a much more interconnected world. Many things that we do together, like the International Space Station, like the Olympic Games, which didn't exist, go back to a couple of centuries, didn't really have, I can't remember when the Olympic Games started, origins of Olympic Games. Let's just look at that. this is because I'm in a private thing. So, and then we've got other things like where we work together on the ozone layer, and we're now working together. Yes, but the Olympic Games history, in 1894, the first modern games in 1896. So if you go back 2 centuries, then assuming Wikipedia got it right, usually does, on such things like that. Remember, you've got to remember with Wikipedia, someone could have edited it just 3 seconds ago and change 1899 to 1896 for some bizarre reason. So if I really need to know, I would double check somewhere to this history.com and check them. But you could be reasonably they things like that get reverted so quickly with something as major as that. Except I actually want to search for 1896. There we are, 1896 in Athens. So that did exist. So that did exist at the time of World War II, but it doesn't exist. But there are many more things since then. The International Space Station is much later development, where there was the Russia and the United States competing, but peacefully. So before again, that was another thing that gradually developed peaceful cooperation in space, because first of all, our modern space race started as a result of the Hitler's rockets that he developed for World War II. And one what was his name? The rocket man. One rocket. I'll just do one rocket. It'll probably come up with the right person. Werner von Braun, the rocket technology. Anyway, he developed the rockets for Hitler, and then at the end of the World War, then he went to the United States, and he was employed to make the first rockets for United States. And really, it's his rockets that got the United States into space. It would have taken a good few more years if it weren't for him. And so anyway, the United States and Russia and the United States, because at the end of World War II, then Hitler's Germany had the best rocket technology in the world, and so they were kind of fighting to try and employ these rocket scientists, and so Russia got some and the United States got some, and then that started the space race, and so anyway. Soon after World War II, the United States was thinking in terms of setting up a military base on the moon. And think how different our century would be if there were soldiers, United States soldiers on the moon, who were claiming the moon for the United States. And it would have put a completely different complexion on space activities. But we developed the Outer Space Treaty. And one of the things in the treaty is you're not permitted to stake claim to any part of the moon. No country can do that. And another part of it was you can't militarize the moon. Military officers can go there, as they did for Apollo, but they have to go there peacefully. And we can't have weapons of mass destruction in space. So these things. We can have ordinary weapons. There's a pistol on the ISS, which is not meant for shooting people in space. It's meant for shooting animals to frighten them away if the capsule lands in a remote place. And the Russians experimented with laser pistols. Sounds very futuristic, but it seems they can't have worked very well because they just tried for a while, and then they gave up on the idea. So anyway. We have largely peaceful cooperation in space. We have the United States and Russia both in the same space station, and that, who knows what that did in terms of maybe some wars and such prevented by that. We have the Olympic Games Olympic movement has grown a lot. We have lots of peaceful things going on. Then we have this where we work together on COVID-19 and with the pandemic in really remarkable ways. The entire world pulled together. And then we also have the way we are coming together on climate change. So this is a very different world. And if you project forward another century, and then another century, I think we're probably going to see the end of war at some point. Probably a couple of centuries from now, people will look back to us and think, all those primitive people that used to go to war with each other. A bit like we look back to the Stone Age or something. So there will be a time in the future when our present day, which seems so technologically advanced to us, and they might look not so much at our technology, but our sociology or psychology, and think of us as being like kind of Stone Age people, very, very primitive in terms of the way that we still had war, for instance. And for instance, I think a couple of centuries from now, it will seem quite extraordinary that we had hunger anywhere on the world. People just will look back and say, why didn't they feed everyone? They had plenty of food. We have an excess of food at the end of every year. So why back then in the 21st century, when they had so much food, did anyone starve or have malnourishment? Why, when you had vaccines, and we've had vaccines for measles for decades, did they still have measles? It doesn't make much sense. We've got a very effective vaccine against measles. Why is there still measles in the world? Why is there still polio in the world? So COVID-19 might turn that around. It might be that after COVID-19, then people start thinking, well, once we've got to eradicate it, we can eradicate it. If we could work together, we can eradicate it in the next couple of years. Next year maybe even 2021. And then people will look and say, okay, we got rid of COVID-19. Why don't we get rid of measles? Why does the world still have measles in it? Why does the world still have polio? And all these other diseases. And there are quite a few diseases that we can get rid of. And I think in the 23rd century, say, they will think us incredibly primitive that it took us so long to get rid of the diseases that we knew how to get rid of. And that we don't have universal health care by the people who are not getting the best possible health care. Yeah, I think that'll be taken for granted in the 23rd century. I just will wonder. So that's the direction I see things as moving. So we're moving away from warfare. Competition, sports type competition, that sort of thing, surely that'll continue. I can't see that ever stopping. We're still going to have athletes, and we're still going to have all sorts of competitions and things, and scientific competition and so on, and probably national identities and things like that. But we don't need to do it with weapons. And so anyway, we'll see. But and I think for those of you who are still here into the 22nd century, I think we may start to see see even more movement in this direction than we have had so far in the previous century. That's the direction we're going. We're not going towards World War. I don't see that. If we do get anything happen, it's going to be a mistake, and then everyone's going to be trying to mop up after the mistake. Yeah. So just where we're going. Anyway, I'll give a separate talk about that, and I'll stop this now, and hopefully this helps some of you.